My breath caught in my throat as I stepped into the nursery. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "Max, move!" I gasped, my voice shaking. But my loyal German shepherd wouldn't budge. He stood rigid in front of my baby's crib, his body tense, ears pinned forward, and hackles raised. It had been an ordinary night just moments before. I had been lying on the couch, enjoying a few minutes of quiet while my newborn, Lily, slept peacefully in her crib. Max, my ever-watchful protector, had been resting nearby, his large frame sprawled across the living room rug. Then he bolted up. A low growl rumbled in his chest, his ears flicking toward Lily's nursery. His body stiffened, and without hesitation he sprinted down the hall. A chill ran down my spine. Max was always gentle, always loving. But when his instincts kicked in like this, I knew something wasn't right. I jumped to my feet and rushed after him. The moment I reached the doorway, I saw him, blocking the crib, standing like a wall between whatever was inside and me. I took a deep breath and stepped closer. The room was dim, the soft glow of the nightlight casting long shadows. Everything seemed normal. Until I saw Lily. She was awake, but she wasn't crying. Her little face was scrunched up, her tiny hands trembling slightly. And Max? He wasn't moving an inch. Terror gripped me. I reached out, trying to gently push Max aside, but he let out a sharp bark. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting. "Max! What is it?" I pleaded, my voice nearly breaking. He only barked again, lowering his body slightly, his muscles coiled like a spring. Panic took over. Was something in the crib? Was she in danger? My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, ready to call 911. But then, a strange sound filled the air. A faint wheeze, my eyes shot back to Lily. Then I saw it. Her lips weren't their usual rosy pink. They were turning blue. My heart nearly stopped. "Oh my God!" I cried, shoving past Max. My baby, my sweet, perfect baby, was struggling to breathe. I grabbed her, my fingers ice cold against her tiny body. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. My mind went blank for a second before survival instincts kicked in. I had to act fast. I rushed out of the nursery, cradling her close. "Max, come!" I shouted, and for the first time, he moved. He followed on my heels as I sprinted through the house. My hands fumbled for the car keys as I flew out the front door, heart hammering. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I kept one hand on Lily's back, feeling the weak rise and fall of her breaths. "Hang on, baby," I whispered over and over, tears stinging my eyes. Max sat in the passenger seat, watching me with those deep, knowing eyes. He had tried to tell me. He had known before I did. By the time we burst into the emergency room, a nurse was already rushing toward us. "She's not breathing right. Please," I sobbed, handing Lily over to the medical team. They whisked her away, leaving me standing there, shaking from head to toe. Max pressed against my leg, his warmth grounding me. Minutes felt like hours. My stomach churned as I paced the waiting room, my mind replaying the moment over and over. If Max hadn't reacted, if he hadn't blocked the crib, I might not have noticed until it was too late. A doctor finally appeared. "Your daughter had a severe respiratory reaction," he explained gently. "She wasn't getting enough oxygen, but we got to her in time. She's stable now. You did the right thing bringing her in so quickly." Tears streamed down my face. I felt my legs nearly give out, but Max was there, supporting me. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around him, pressing my face into his thick fur. "You saved her, buddy," I whispered. "You saved my baby." That night, as I sat by Lily's hospital crib, Watching her tiny chest rise and fall with steady breaths, I knew I would never doubt Max again. He had sensed something was wrong before I had any clue. He had stood his ground, refusing to let anything happen to her. I reached down, running my fingers through his fur. "You're not just our dog, Max. You're our guardian angel." As the room fell silent except for the steady beeping of machines, I closed my eyes, silently thanking the one who had always watched over us. And I knew this was just the beginning. The hospital room felt smaller than it was, as if the walls were closing in on me while I sat beside Lily's crib. The steady beep of the monitors was a stark contrast to the pounding of my heart, which hadn't stopped racing since we'd rushed through those emergency doors. Lily looked so peaceful now, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Her little fingers curled into loose fists as she slept. But I couldn't shake the image of her turning blue, her breaths coming in shallow gasps, nor could I ignore the unshakable feeling that Max had known something was wrong before I ever did. Max was curled up on the hospital floor next to me, his head resting on his paws. He had barely left my side since we arrived, and even though the hospital staff initially hesitated at the sight of a large German shepherd in the waiting room, they quickly realized that there was no separating him from us. The nurses had even given him a blanket, as if they understood his place in all of this. I reached down and stroked the top of his head, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath my trembling fingers. "You saved her, Max," I whispered. "You knew. You always know." Max's ears flicked slightly, and he let out a soft sigh, closing his eyes. He wasn't just a dog. He was my protector, my daughter's guardian, and I had never felt more grateful for him than in that moment. The hours dragged by in a haze of exhaustion, relief, and a lingering fear I couldn't shake. At some point, my husband Ryan arrived, his face lined with worry as he stepped into the room. The second he saw Lily, the tension in his shoulders eased, and he hurried to my side, pulling me into his arms. "I got here as fast as I could," he murmured. "How is she?" "She's okay now," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "She had some kind of respiratory reaction, but they stabilized her. If Max hadn't—" I swallowed hard, shaking my head. "If Max hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened." Ryan's eyes flicked down to Max, who remained on the floor, his ears perked up as he listened to us. Ryan crouched down, running a hand over the dog's back. "Good boy, Max," he said softly. "You're a hero." Max wagged his tail slightly, but didn't move from his spot. He was still watching over Lily, still making sure she was safe. The realization hit me harder than ever. Max wasn't just reacting to a single moment of danger. He had always been watching over her, always alert. Had I ever truly appreciated just how deeply he understood us? A nurse entered the room then, breaking the moment. "Lily's doing great," she said with a kind smile. "We're keeping her for observation overnight, but if everything looks good by morning, she'll be able to go home." Relief washed over me. "Thank you," I said, barely able to hold back the fresh wave of emotion threatening to rise in my throat. "She's a strong little girl," the nurse added. "And it looks like she's got the best guardian she could ask for." She glanced at Max with a knowing smile before exiting the room. Ryan settled into the chair beside me, his hand finding mine. "We're going to have to keep a closer eye on her breathing," he said. "Make sure this doesn't happen again." I nodded. "I know. I don't know how Max knew before I did. It's like he sensed it." "Maybe he did," Ryan said. "Maybe he's more in tune with her than we are." I thought about that as I sat there, watching Lily sleep. Max had always been gentle with her, always sticking close whenever I placed her in her crib. I had assumed it was just loyalty, just his way of staying near his family. But now, I realized it was more than that. He had been watching over her, protecting her in a way I hadn't fully understood until now. The night passed slowly, but Lily remained stable. The next morning, the doctors gave us the green light to take her home, reminding us to keep a close watch on her breathing and to follow up with her pediatrician. I bundled her up in her soft blanket, holding her close as we left the hospital, Max walking beside us every step of the way. When we got home, Max seemed even more protective than usual. He stuck close as I laid Lily in her crib, standing nearby as if making sure she was still breathing properly. And that night, as I curled up in bed, Max chose to sleep outside Lily's door rather than in his usual spot beside our bed. "He's not going to let her out of his sight, is he?" Ryan murmured as we watched Max through the dim light of the hallway. I shook my head. No. And honestly, I'm glad. Days passed, and while life slowly returned to normal, the incident never left my mind. Every time I saw Max watching over Lily, every time he gently nudged her with his nose when she stirred in her crib, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had always loved Max, always cherished him as part of our family. But now, I saw him for what he truly was, a guardian, a protector, and the reason my daughter was still with us today. One evening, about a week after we brought Lily home, I found myself sitting on the floor beside Max, my fingers running absently through his fur, as he rested his head on my lap. "I don't know what we'd do without you," I murmured. "You're her guardian angel, Max. You always have been." He let out a soft sigh, his eyes drifting closed, and for the first time in days, I felt at peace. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Lily would always have someone watching over her, and that someone had 4 legs, a loyal heart, and a love that knew no bounds. The days following Lily's hospital visit had settled into a new kind of routine. Max never let her out of his sight, following me from room to room whenever I carried her, stationing himself beside the crib when she napped, and pressing close when I fed her in the rocking chair. He had always been devoted, but now it was as if some invisible thread tethered him to her completely. One morning, as I laid Lily down for her nap, I noticed something different in Max's behavior. He was watching her again, but this time he was sniffing the air, his head tilted slightly. His ears flicked back and forth, and I could tell something had caught his attention. "What is it, Max?" I whispered, kneeling beside him and running my hand over his back. He was tense, his muscles bunched like he was waiting for something. I turned my head to follow his gaze, but everything looked normal. Lily's tiny chest rose and fell steadily, and the nursery was just as I had left it. But Max didn't relax. He let out a low whine, pressing his nose against my arm before stepping back toward the crib, his posture stiff. A nervous ripple ran through me. I had learned to trust Max's instincts, and if he was reacting like this, there had to be a reason. I reached down, picked Lily up carefully, and carried her into the living room where Ryan was sitting on the couch, reading something on his phone. "Max is acting weird again," I told him as I sat down. "It's like he senses something, but I don't see anything wrong." Ryan looked up, concern flickering in his eyes. "He did the same thing before, didn't he?" I nodded. "Yeah, and he was right." Ryan set his phone aside and watched as Max sat in front of me, his eyes locked on Lily, still sniffing the air lightly. "Maybe we should take her in for a checkup, just to be safe." I didn't argue. The last time I had hesitated, Max had been right, and I wasn't about to take chances with my daughter's health. We packed up Lily's things and drove to the pediatrician's office. Max couldn't come inside, so Ryan stayed with him in the car while I carried Lily into the waiting room, bouncing her gently on my hip. She looked fine, happy even, but I couldn't shake the unease curling in my chest. Max wouldn't react like that for no reason. After a short wait, Dr. Mitchell, our pediatrician, greeted us warmly and ushered us into an exam room. "What brings you in today?" she asked, peering at Lily with a gentle smile. I hesitated before answering, feeling slightly ridiculous. It's our dog, Max," I admitted. "He's been acting really alert around her. The last time he did this, she had trouble breathing, and I wanted to make sure everything is okay." Dr. Mitchell didn't look amused or dismissive. If anything, she seemed intrigued. "Dogs are incredibly perceptive," she said, gently examining Lily. "They can detect changes in scent, shifts in behavior, even medical issues before we do. I think you were right to bring her in." That eased some of my anxiety, but not all of it. I watched carefully as Dr. Mitchell checked Lily's breathing, reflexes, and heart rate. Everything seemed normal, and for a moment I wondered if maybe I was just being paranoid. Then she frowned slightly. "What is it?" I asked, my grip tightening around Lily's blanket. Dr. Mitchell leaned in, checking Lily's chest with her stethoscope again, then gently touched her ribs. "Her breathing sounds normal now, but I want to keep an eye on something. Have you noticed her struggling to nurse or seeming more tired than usual?" I hesitated. "She's been a little fussy the past few days, but I thought it was just normal baby stuff." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "I don't want to alarm you, but I'd like to run a quick test just to be sure. It could be nothing, or it could be early signs of something like mild respiratory distress." My stomach dropped. "Like last time?" "Possibly, but let's not jump to conclusions. You brought her in early, and that's good." I nodded numbly as she stepped out of the room to arrange for a test. Lily gurgled softly in my arms, completely unaware of my growing worry. When the test results came back, Dr. Mitchell reassured me that Lily was stable, but that there was a slight irregularity in her oxygen levels. "It's subtle," she said, "but it's something we'll monitor closely. I'm going to give you a pulse oximeter to use at home, just in case. If anything seems off, bring her in immediately." I let out a shaky breath. "So, Max was right again." Dr. Mitchell smiled. "Seems like it. You've got a very special dog." When we got back to the car, Ryan could tell by the look on my face that something had been found. "What did they say?" I explained everything as we drove home, with Max watching me from the passenger seat, as if waiting for an answer himself. "They gave us a monitor for her," I finished. "It's not serious yet, but if it had gone unnoticed." Ryan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. We owe Max more than we can ever repay. When we got home, I set up the monitor as instructed, checking Lily's oxygen levels every few hours. It was reassuring to have, but even more reassuring was Max's presence. He still didn't leave Lily's side, and I realized then that I would never doubt him again. Days passed, and though Lily seemed fine, Max remained on high alert. He followed me more closely than ever, and one night, while I was putting Lily to sleep, I saw him watching me intently, ears twitching as if listening for something I couldn't hear. A shiver ran down my spine. I knew without a doubt that he had saved her life once, maybe twice. And if Max was still watching her like that, then maybe, just maybe, there was something else I hadn't seen yet. I pulled the blanket tighter around Lily and glanced at Max. "What is it, buddy?" I whispered. "What are you trying to tell me now?" Max didn't move from his spot outside Lily's crib that night. I had watched him closely, expecting him to relax once she had settled into sleep. But instead he remained at his post, his ears twitching every so often, his eyes locked on her as though he were expecting something to happen. I was exhausted, my body aching with the weight of the past few weeks, but I couldn't bring myself to close my eyes. I sat on the floor next to Max, one hand resting on his back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his breathing. He was calm, but alert, his body tense beneath my touch. Every so often his nose would twitch, and he'd let out a quiet breath, barely audible over the soft hum of the baby monitor. I checked Lily's pulse oximeter for what felt like the 100th time, relieved to see her oxygen levels holding steady. The doctor had assured me that the irregularities we had seen were minor, that we had caught things early enough to prevent anything more serious. But still, I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me like a second skin. If Max was still on edge, then I had to believe there was a reason for it. Ryan had fallen asleep in our bedroom, exhausted from juggling work and the emotional toll of everything we had been through. I didn't have the heart to wake him, not when he needed the rest just as badly as I did. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face, then whispered to Max, "What is it, buddy? What are you still worried about?" Max let out a quiet whine, shifting slightly, his tail giving a single thump against the hardwood floor. He wasn't panicked, not like he had been that night in the nursery when he had blocked me from Lily's crib. But he wasn't at ease either. I pushed myself up, stretching my stiff limbs, and decided to do another check of the house. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't ignore the tension radiating off Max. I walked quietly through the hall, glancing into each room as I passed. Everything looked normal. The doors were locked, the windows latched, and the baby monitor was transmitting a perfect image of Lily sleeping peacefully. Still, something wasn't sitting right. When I returned to the nursery, Max had moved. He was now standing, his nose pressed against the bars of the crib, his body tense. My pulse quickened as I hurried to check Lily, but she was still asleep, her tiny face relaxed, her breaths even. I frowned, running a hand over her forehead. She wasn't feverish. There was no sign of distress, so why was Max still acting like something was wrong? I sat back down beside him, watching as he continued to sniff the air. Then I noticed it, the way his ears twitched toward the ceiling. My heart skipped a beat. The attic. I had barely thought about it since we moved in. It was mostly used for storage, a place to keep old boxes, forgotten holiday decorations, and things we didn't have space for in the main house. But Max's focus was unwavering. His entire body was rigid now, every muscle locked in place. He wasn't watching Lily anymore. He was listening. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing as I stood. My hands felt clammy, and I had to resist the urge to wake Ryan. No. If something was up there, I had to check it myself first. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and hesitated only briefly before heading toward the narrow pull-down ladder at the end of the hallway. Max followed me closely, his nails clicking softly against the floor. I reached for the string, pulling down the attic ladder slowly. The creaking noise made me wince, and I paused, listening. Silence. My pulse thundered in my ears. I climbed up cautiously, one hand gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. The moment my head cleared the opening, I swept the beam across the space. Boxes, old furniture, the faint scent of dust and insulation. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then Max growled. I froze, my flashlight trembling slightly as I directed it toward the far corner of the attic. A dark shape shifted. My breath caught in my throat, and for a split second, I couldn't move. Then something scurried, a quick, frantic movement, and I barely caught sight of the small, beady eyes that reflected the light. Rats. A sharp breath of relief escaped me. I lowered the flashlight, shaking my head as I tried to calm my racing heart. Of course, it made sense. Max must have heard them moving around, sensed them before I had any idea they were up here. I exhaled, shaking my head. "Just rats, Max," I whispered. But he didn't relax. Instead, he was staring intently at something just behind the stack of old boxes. His body was still stiff, his ears perked forward. I hesitated. Shifting the flashlight, I took a cautious step forward. I had expected to see more rodents, maybe a nest of some kind, but instead something else caught my eye. A faint gleam of metal, half buried beneath a pile of discarded insulation. I frowned, my heartbeat picking up again. Slowly, carefully, I crouched down, brushing the insulation aside. And that's when I saw it. An old, rusted vent. The cover was loose, as though someone had pried it open and never properly sealed it again. I swallowed hard, shining the flashlight into the narrow opening. The air inside smelled stale, thick with dust, but something about it made my stomach turn uneasily. I reached out hesitantly, touching the edge of the vent cover. It wobbled under my fingers. Then, from inside, came a sound. A whisper of movement. Not the quick, frantic scurrying of rats. Something slower, more deliberate. I jerked back, my breath catching. Max growled again, low and deep. I backed away, my mind racing. Whatever was in there, it wasn't just rodents. I needed Ryan. I needed to get out of the attic. Heart pounding, I turned on my heel and hurried down the ladder, Max following right on my heels. As soon as my feet hit the hallway floor, I slammed the attic hatch shut, my hands shaking as I locked it. Then I ran to wake Ryan. Because something wasn't right. And I had a feeling Max had known it all along. Ryan jolted awake the moment I shook his shoulder. "What? What's wrong?" he mumbled, blinking against the dim glow of the hallway light. I didn't have time to ease him into it. "There's something in the attic," I whispered, my pulse racing. "It's not just rats." That got his attention. He sat up quickly, rubbing a hand over his face. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. I thought it was just pests, but then I found this loose vent cover, and I swear I heard something moving inside. Not scurrying. Something else." My voice trembled as I spoke, my hands still shaking. Max was going crazy up there. He wouldn't stop growling. Ryan frowned, immediately alert. "Did you see anything?" "No, but I didn't want to wait around to find out." Max, who had been standing right beside me, let out a soft growl, his eyes locked onto the attic door down the hall. He was still on edge, his entire body stiff, ears perked forward as if waiting for something. Ryan swung his legs over the bed and stood, already moving toward the closet. He grabbed the flashlight and an old wooden bat he kept tucked in the corner. "Okay, let's check it out." I hesitated. "Ryan, what if—" He gave me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "If it's nothing, we'll know. And if it's something, we'll deal with it." My stomach twisted, but I nodded. "I'll stay here with Lily." Max, however, had no intention of staying behind. The moment Ryan stepped out of the bedroom, Max followed, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I picked up the baby monitor, my hand still unsteady as I watched Ryan make his way to the pull-down attic ladder. He reached up and tugged the string. The creaking noise sent a shiver down my spine, and I swallowed hard. Ryan climbed up slowly, flashlight in one hand, bat in the other. Max stood at the base of the ladder, staring up, his body tense. I kept my eyes on the baby monitor, the screen showing Lily still sound asleep in her crib. A long silence stretched on. Then I heard Ryan's voice from above. "I see the vent cover you were talking about." My fingers clenched the baby monitor tighter. And? Another pause. Then a soft curse. "Yeah, this isn't just rats." My heart leaped into my throat. "What do you mean? What is it?" Ryan shifted, his footsteps echoing above me. "There are signs that someone's been up here recently. The dust is disturbed in certain spots, and there are things. Clothes. Food wrappers." His voice lowered. "It looks like someone's been living up here." A wave of cold dread crashed over me. "Living?" I whispered. "Are they still there?" Ryan moved carefully, sweeping the flashlight across the space. "I don't know. If they were, they must have left when they heard us coming. But this wasn't just one night's worth of stuff. Someone's been here for a while." I stared at the attic opening, my stomach twisting into knots. The idea that a stranger had been living above our heads without us knowing made my skin crawl. I instinctively looked toward Lily's nursery, a protective instinct surging through me. Ryan climbed back down, shaking his head. "I think they must have been using the vent as a way in and out, maybe accessing another part of the house from outside." Max was still tense, still watching. "What do we do?" I asked, hugging my arms around myself. "We're calling the police," Ryan said firmly. "If someone's been living up there, I don't want to take any chances." I nodded quickly, reaching for my phone with shaky hands. The thought of someone creeping through our attic while we slept sent shivers down my spine. I dialed 911, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. The dispatcher assured me that an officer would be sent right away. Minutes later, we heard the sound of a police car pulling into our driveway. Ryan went to meet them while I stayed inside with Max and Lily, my heart still hammering in my chest. The officers searched the attic thoroughly. They confirmed Ryan's suspicions. There were clear signs that someone had been staying up there. A tattered blanket, a few empty food containers, even a small flashlight tucked behind one of the boxes. But whoever it was, they were gone now. The police took photos, gathered what little evidence they could, and advised us to secure all access points to the attic. They also suggested we check our home's exterior for any possible entryways we might have overlooked. "We'll keep a patrol in the area for the next few nights," one of the officers assured us. "If you notice anything suspicious, don't hesitate to call." After they left, Ryan and I immediately went to work sealing up any potential entry points, making sure the vent was properly secured. I barely slept that night, every little noise setting me on edge. Max, however, didn't rest at all. He stayed by Lily's crib, his eyes never leaving the door. The next day, I called our neighbor, Mrs. Thornton, an elderly woman who had lived on our street for over 20 years. If anyone had noticed something strange around our house, it would be her. She frowned as she listened to me. "You know, now that you mention it, I did see someone a few nights ago. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I thought I saw a shadow move by the side of your house. I figured it was just a trick of the light, but..." She shook her head. I should have said something. I reassured her that she wasn't at fault, but my unease only deepened. Someone had been watching our house, living inside it. The days passed, and despite the police patrols, I still felt a lingering sense of dread. But Max remained our guardian, never straying far from Lily's crib, never relaxing his watch. One night, as I was rocking Lily to sleep, I looked down at Max and whispered, "You knew, didn't you? You always know." He lifted his head slightly, his deep brown eyes meeting mine. And for the first time in days, I felt just a little safer. The house felt different after the police left. I told myself it was just my imagination, that we had secured everything, and there was no longer any reason to be afraid. But even with all the locks checked and the attic sealed up tight, I couldn't shake the unease curling in my stomach. Max never relaxed either. He had always been watchful, but now it was different. Every night, he positioned himself outside Lily's room and refused to sleep anywhere else. Even when Ryan tried to coax him into our bedroom, he wouldn't budge. "He's not letting his guard down," Ryan murmured as we stood in the hallway that night, watching Max curled up near Lily's crib, his ears twitching at every sound. Maybe he still senses something. I shivered. But we checked everything. The attic is sealed. The vents are closed. The police didn't find anyone. Ryan didn't say anything, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He didn't want to admit it, but he felt it too. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house sent my nerves on edge. I lay awake, listening to Max shift occasionally, his nails tapping softly against the floor as he moved closer to Lily's crib. By morning, I was exhausted, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. The day passed without incident. I went through our usual routine, feeding Lily, playing with her, taking Max for a short walk in the backyard. Ryan went to work, and I did my best to keep my mind busy, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Then, that evening, as I was making dinner, I heard a noise. It was faint, barely noticeable over the hum of the stove, but Max's reaction was immediate. His head shot up, ears forward, body going rigid. I froze, gripping the spoon in my hand. "What is it?" I whispered, barely breathing. Max let out a low, warning growl, his gaze locked on the back door. I turned slowly. At first, I didn't see anything. The yard outside was empty, just the faint glow of the porch light illuminating the patio furniture. But Max didn't stop growling. I took a step toward the window, heart pounding, scanning the darkness. And then, there, a flicker of movement, a shadow shifting just beyond the edge of the light. My breath hitched. Someone was out there. I backed away from the window, reaching for my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed Ryan's number, my mind racing. "Hey, what's up?" Ryan answered casually, but the moment he heard my voice, he knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" "There's someone outside," I whispered. "Max saw them first. I saw something move near the back fence." "Lock the doors. I'm on my way." His voice was sharp now, urgent. "Call the police." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and immediately dialed 911. My voice was steadier this time as I explained the situation. "I saw someone near my backyard. My dog alerted me first." "Stay inside, ma'am," the dispatcher said firmly. "We're sending officers to your location now. Keep your doors locked, and do not engage." I hung up, my pulse racing, and double-checked every lock in the house. Max was still at the back door, his body tense, his tail low, waiting. Minutes felt like hours. Ryan got home first, bursting through the front door and immediately scanning the house. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said shakily, "but Max hasn't stopped watching the backyard." Ryan went to the window, his hands clenched into fists. "I don't see anyone now." Just then, the sound of sirens cut through the quiet night. The police had arrived. Ryan met them at the door while I stayed inside with Lily, holding her close as I listened to the muffled voices outside. The officers searched the yard, their flashlights sweeping over every corner, but they found nothing. "No signs of forced entry," one of them told Ryan. "But if you saw someone out here, they could have taken off as soon as they heard movement inside." I hugged myself, nodding. "I know what I saw, and Max, he wouldn't react like that for no reason." The officer gave Max an approving look. "Dogs like him? They don't just imagine things. If he was on alert, there was something out here. We'll increase patrols in the area for the next few nights. In the meantime, make sure your security is tight. Cameras, alarms, anything to deter trespassers. After they left, Ryan and I checked every window, every door, making sure everything was secure. I barely let go of Lily all night, my heart still pounding. Ryan pulled me close as we sat on the couch. We'll get a security system installed first thing in the morning, and cameras. I nodded, knowing it was the right thing to do. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. As I looked down at Max, curled protectively at my feet, I knew one thing for certain. He had sensed something before I did. He had been warning me all along. And now, more than ever, I was going to listen. The next morning, the security system installation crew arrived early. I hadn't slept much, my body running on pure adrenaline, but I was relieved that we were finally taking steps to secure the house. Ryan had spent half the night researching the best cameras and alarms, determined not to leave anything to chance. Max never left my side as I carried Lily around the house, watching the workers set up the system. Every so often he would lift his head, ears twitching, his sharp eyes scanning the windows. It was as if he was waiting for something, or rather, expecting something, and that unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Ryan walked in from outside, dusting his hands off. They're setting up the last of the motion sensors in the backyard. We'll have cameras covering every entrance, and the alarms are synced to our phones. I exhaled slowly. Good. Maybe now we can actually sleep. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders and kissed the top of my head. We'll be okay. I nodded, wanting to believe him, but Max's posture told me he wasn't convinced. By the afternoon, the installation was complete, and the house felt like a fortress. Every door and window had a sensor, every inch of the yard had a camera, and the alarm system was state-of-the-art. It should have been enough to make me feel safe. But as I fed Lily her bottle, I kept thinking about that shadow outside the fence, the movement I had seen. Someone had been there, watching, waiting. As the sun set, Max's pacing grew more intense. He circled near the back door, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. His growls were low, cautious. Ryan noticed it too. He's been like this since last night. I know, I murmured. What if whoever was out there comes back? Ryan frowned, rubbing a hand down his face. Then we have cameras, alarms, and the police on standby. They won't get near you or Lily. I wanted to believe him, but Max's continued vigilance kept my nerves on edge. He had warned us before. He had sensed something in the attic before we even knew there was someone living up there. And now, he was on high alert again. That night, Ryan and I sat in bed, watching the security feed on our phones. The cameras captured everything: front yard, backyard, side entrance. Every angle was covered. Hours passed, and nothing happened. No movement. No signs of anything unusual. Maybe it had all been paranoia. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion finally overtook me. I closed my eyes, letting sleep claim me. And then the alarm blared. I shot up, my heart slamming against my ribs. Ryan was already grabbing his phone, checking the feed. Motion detected in the backyard. Max was already up, barking furiously as he ran to the door. I grabbed Lily, holding her close, my hands shaking as I watched Ryan navigate the security app. There! I pointed at the screen. The camera footage showed a figure near the back fence, barely visible in the dim light. Ryan cursed under his breath. They're testing the system! They know we're watching, I whispered. Max's barking grew louder, more urgent. He pawed at the door, ready to attack whatever was out there. Ryan pulled out his phone and called the police. Someone's in our backyard. We have it on camera. I gripped Lily tighter, my breath coming fast and shallow. The figure moved, stepping further into the yard. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. I stared at the screen, my skin cold. Where did they go? Ryan shook his head. They were watching us, testing us. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the front of our house. The police swept the area, but there was no sign of the intruder, just footprints in the grass near the fence. One of the officers frowned at the camera footage we showed him. They knew where the cameras were. See how they stayed just out of full view? A chill ran down my spine. So they planned this? Looks that way, the officer admitted. We'll increase patrols again, but if you see anything else, anything, call us immediately. After they left, Ryan double-checked every lock. The cameras still ran, watching, but I felt more vulnerable than ever. Max finally settled by the nursery door, his eyes never straying from the hallway. He wasn't sleeping. Neither was I. By morning, I was running on fumes. Ryan made coffee, his jaw tight with frustration. They were testing us, and now they know what we have. I rubbed my temples. So what do we do now? We stay alert. We don't let our guard down. His gaze flicked toward Max. And we trust him. I followed Ryan's gaze to where Max sat, still watching, still listening. His presence had already saved us once, maybe even twice. And I had a terrible feeling we were going to need him again soon. The house felt different in the daylight, but not in a reassuring way. It was as if every shadow held something unseen, something waiting. Ryan had left for work, though not without hesitation, and I was left alone with Lily and Max, the two most important pieces of my world. And if Max's tense posture was anything to go by, he wasn't convinced that the threat was gone. I spent the morning checking every lock again, ensuring that all windows were secure. Max followed me from room to room, his movements careful, his ears pricked forward, listening to sounds I couldn't hear. He wasn't whining, wasn't growling, but his tail was stiff, his muscles taut. I kept my phone close, my stomach twisting with the same question over and over. Would they come back? Lily cooed from her bassinet in the living room, her tiny fists waving in the air, oblivious to the worry flooding the house. I wished I could shield her from it completely, wished I could live in the blissful ignorance she had. But as I sat on the couch, watching Max's unwavering attention toward the back door, I knew that wasn't an option. The hours crept by. I fed Lily, cleaned up around the house, but never let myself stray too far from the security monitors. Every time a car passed or a branch moved outside, my nerves spiked. The police had told us they would patrol the area more frequently, but it wasn't enough to settle my anxiety. By midday, Max had repositioned himself by the sliding glass door, staring out at the backyard. His ears twitched. His gaze locked on something just beyond my sight. I swallowed, my throat dry. "What is it, buddy?" I whispered. He didn't move, didn't even blink. Slowly I stood, keeping one hand on the counter for support, as I stepped toward the door. The yard looked normal. The grass was still. The trees swayed lightly in the breeze. I reached for the security system app, pulling up the backyard feed, but nothing looked unusual. But Max was still watching. I exhaled and backed away, unwilling to let my paranoia get the better of me. The afternoon passed in a slow, unbearable crawl. Every creak in the house made me jump. Even when I tried to distract myself with small tasks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting. Then, as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Max let out a sharp bark. I spun toward him, my pulse rocketing. He was at the front window now, standing on all fours, his head low, teeth bared. A deep, rumbling growl rolled through his chest. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I pulled up the front door camera feed. At first, I saw nothing. Just the empty porch, the quiet street. But then, barely in view of the camera's edge, something moved. A shadow. Someone was standing just outside the camera's range, partially hidden by the edge of the porch. I couldn't make out any details, but the silhouette was unmistakable. I sucked in a breath, my stomach knotting painfully. Max barked again, louder this time. The figure flinched, retreating a step back toward the street. My hands were shaking as I dialed Ryan's number. "Someone's here," I whispered the moment he answered. "What? Where?" His voice sharpened with urgency. "Out front. I can't see them clearly, but Max, he saw them first. Call the police. Now." I hung up and did exactly that, keeping my eyes on the monitor. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but the seconds felt like hours. The figure remained at the edge of the porch, unmoving, watching. Then, as the distant sound of sirens became faintly audible, they turned and walked away. Not ran. Walked. Like they wanted me to know they weren't afraid. I could barely breathe as the police arrived, checking the area, scanning the security footage. But just like the night before, they were gone before anything could be done. Ryan rushed home minutes later, his face tight with anger and worry. "They're trying to intimidate us," he muttered after the officers left. "They want us scared." "Well, it's working," I admitted, wrapping my arms around myself. "We need to do more than just wait for them to come back," Ryan said. "If they want us scared, we need to make sure they know we're not easy targets." I looked down at Max, who was still standing by the window, his body stiff, ears forward. He wasn't relaxing. Not yet. And that meant I wasn't going to either. Ryan called a friend who worked in private security, someone who could give us better insight on how to protect ourselves. The next morning, we met with him at a cafe a few blocks away. "You're being watched," he said simply after looking at the footage. "Whoever this is, they're calculating. They know where the cameras are, and they're testing how far they can go without getting caught." The words sent a chill down my spine. "So what do we do?" Ryan asked. His friend leaned forward. "You reinforce everything. Add more cameras, even the ones they don't expect. Floodlights. Motion sensors where they think there aren't any. And don't just react, act. Change your routine. Make it harder for them to predict your movements." I nodded, absorbing every word. I wasn't just going to sit here and let some faceless person keep me in fear. That night, as we adjusted the cameras and added the new security measures, Max stayed right by my side. He was still watching, still waiting. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was ready. The night air was thick with tension as Ryan double-checked the last of the newly installed security features. Motion sensors now covered every blind spot, hidden cameras were placed where no one would suspect, and floodlights lined the perimeter of our yard. It should have felt like a fortress, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Max hadn't left his post by the window all day. He barely touched his food, his entire body coiled like a spring, ready to snap at any moment. His ears twitched at every distant sound, his eyes locked onto the yard as if waiting for something only he could sense. Ryan exhaled as he joined me in the living room, rubbing a hand over his face. "Everything's set up. If they come back, We'll see them before they get anywhere near the house." I nodded, but my stomach remained knotted with unease. They want us to feel trapped, like they have control. Ryan's jaw tightened. Then we take that control back. Lily let out a soft whimper from the bassinet, shifting in her sleep. I instinctively reached over to adjust her blanket, brushing my fingers gently over her tiny hand. I wanted so badly for her to grow up in a home where I didn't have to be afraid. The night dragged on, the silence stretching into something unbearable. Ryan sat with his laptop open, reviewing footage from the security cameras, while I lay on the couch, unable to sleep. Max never moved from his position. Then, just past 3 a.m, Max's growl rumbled through the quiet house. I shot up, my pulse hammering. Ryan's eyes snapped to the security feed. "Back fence," he muttered. "Motion detected." I rushed to his side, my hands trembling as I stared at the grainy black and white footage. There it was. Movement. A figure creeping along the fence line, just beyond the reach of the main security lights. Ryan grabbed his phone, already dialing 911. "They're here." Max barked sharply, his body stiffening as he rushed toward the back door. I followed, but Ryan caught my wrist, holding me back. "Stay here. Keep Lily close." My heart thundered in my chest as I held Lily tightly against me, watching through the window as Ryan stepped onto the back porch. A flashlight in one hand, a bat in the other. Max was beside him, his growls deep and menacing. "Hey!" Ryan shouted. "I see you! Police are on their way!" The figure paused. For a long, terrifying moment, they just stood there, watching. Then, they turned and sprinted into the darkness. Max barked furiously, ready to give chase, but Ryan grabbed his collar, keeping him from running after them. "Let them go. The cops will handle it." Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights filled our street. Officers combed the area, but just like before, the intruder had vanished without a trace. An officer approached us as Ryan handed over the security footage. "They're testing you, pushing to see how far they can go." I swallowed hard. "They're not going to stop, are they?" The officer's face was grim. "Not until they get what they want." That statement sent a chill through me. What did they want? Ryan's hand found mine, gripping tightly. "We're not going to let them win." The police left after another round of searching, and we were left alone again in the dark. I sat on the couch, holding Lily close, exhaustion threatening to pull me under, but I couldn't close my eyes. Ryan sat next to me, staring at the security feed, his leg bouncing restlessly. "This isn't random," he muttered. "They aren't just looking to steal something. This is targeted." I knew he was right. It wasn't just a break-in attempt. It wasn't just some petty criminal looking for an easy target. Whoever this was, they wanted something, and they weren't going to stop until they got it. The next morning, Ryan made more calls. He reached out to private security firms, considering hiring someone to watch the house at night. We spoke to neighbors, warning them to be on the lookout. And through it all, Max remained vigilant. He paced the house, watching the windows, his entire demeanor screaming that this wasn't over. By nightfall, I was running on fumes, but I refused to let exhaustion take hold. I put Lily down in her crib, my fingers lingering on her soft skin. "You're safe," I whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you." Max sat by the door, his tail flicking once as he kept watch. The hours ticked by. Midnight came and went, then 1, then 2, and then the motion sensor went off again. Ryan and I were already at the monitor before the alert fully registered. This time, there were 2 figures. One by the back fence, another at the side of the house. My breath caught in my throat. "They're getting bolder," Ryan muttered. "They don't care if we see them now." I held onto the edge of the counter to steady myself. "What do we do?" Ryan's expression hardened. "We don't wait for them to come to us." He grabbed his phone and dialed. "We need officers here now. There are 2 intruders on our property." Max let out a low, warning growl as the figures moved closer. Then, as if they knew we were watching, both figures turned to face the nearest camera. And smiled. I recoiled, horror flooding my veins. Ryan's grip on his phone tightened. "That's it. We're ending this." The sirens blared in the distance, but the figures didn't run. They stayed just long enough to make sure we saw them. Then, just before the police arrived, they slipped into the shadows and disappeared. The officers searched the area, but once again, the intruders had vanished. I hugged my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking. "They're playing with us." Ryan's jaw clenched. Not for long. I glanced down at Max, who was still staring at the door, his body tense. He wasn't fooled. He knew, just as I did, that they'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't just be testing us. The house felt more like a battlefield now. Every light was checked twice, every lock tested 3 times before we allowed ourselves to settle in for the night. Even then, sleep was an illusion. We were waiting, watching, bracing for what we already knew was coming. Max remained on edge, his eyes never leaving the windows. He barely slept, only resting in short bursts before his ears twitched and his head shot up again, scanning the shadows. His instincts had been right before. We weren't about to start doubting him now. Ryan sat at the dining table, flipping through the security footage on his laptop. "They're getting more comfortable," he muttered, his jaw tight. "They want us to know they're here." I leaned against the counter, arms wrapped around myself. "But why? What do they want?" Ryan shook his head, rubbing a hand over his face. "That's what I can't figure out. They're not trying to break in, not trying to steal anything. This is different." I glanced at the baby monitor, watching Lily's peaceful little face as she slept. My heart clenched. "They're not just messing with us. There's a reason." A sharp knock on the front door made me jump. Max erupted into a furious bark, sprinting toward the entrance. Ryan was already moving, his grip tightening on the bat we kept by the door. I checked the security monitor, my stomach twisting into knots. It wasn't an intruder this time. It was one of the officers from the night before. Ryan opened the door, keeping his body between me and the entrance. "Officer?" The man, Officer Grant, nodded once. "Sorry for showing up unannounced, but after last night's incident, I wanted to update you on what we found." Ryan stepped aside, and I moved closer, my pulse thrumming in my ears. "Did you catch them?" Officer Grant exhaled. "No, but we did find something else." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper. He handed it to Ryan, who turned it over carefully. His face darkened as he read the words scrawled across it in jagged handwriting. "We see you." I felt my breath hitch in my throat. My hands clenched at my sides. "Where did you find this?" "Stapled to the back fence," Grant said grimly. "They left it behind on purpose." Ryan handed me the note, his fingers curling into fists. "They're taunting us." Grant nodded. "That's what it looks like. They want to scare you, make you feel helpless." I swallowed hard. "Well, it's working." Max let out a low growl, his body tense as he stood between me and the door, as if sensing my fear. I dropped a hand to his head, gripping his fur like an anchor. "Here's what I recommend," Grant continued. Don't change your routine, but stay extra vigilant. We're increasing patrols in your area, and we're going to have an unmarked car stationed nearby at night. If they come back, we'll be ready." Ryan nodded. "And if they try anything? Then we make sure they regret it." That night, I couldn't stop staring at the note. It sat on the kitchen counter, its message screaming at me in silence. "We see you." Ryan installed more cameras, adjusting angles so there were no more blind spots. We placed motion sensors along the fence line, ensuring we'd be alerted the second anyone got close. But even with all that, I felt no safer than before. Hours passed, and the house was suffocatingly quiet. Every creak, every rustle of the wind made my nerves fray even more. Max was restless, pacing between the nursery and the front door. Then, at 2:37 a.m., the motion sensor alarm blared. Ryan and I were up in an instant, rushing to the monitor. The backyard camera flickered as the feed adjusted to the sudden movement. There they were, 2 figures standing at the edge of the fence, just like before. But this time, they didn't run. They just stood there, watching. Ryan cursed under his breath. "They're pushing us." I felt like ice was running through my veins. "They want us to come outside!" Max snarled, his nails scraping against the floor as he pressed against the glass door, his body vibrating with the need to protect. Ryan reached for his phone, dialing Officer Grant's number directly. "They're back." The figures still didn't move. Even when the floodlights flashed on, bathing them in bright white light, they stayed still. I grabbed Ryan's arm. "Something's wrong." Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they turned and walked away. Not running, not panicked, just walking. Like they were in complete control. 5 minutes later, the police arrived. Officers searched the area, but as expected, they found nothing. Just footprints in the dirt near the fence. And one more thing. Another note. Not yet. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. "They're playing games." Grant studied the note, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, and they're getting bolder." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his body rigid with frustration. "How do we stop this?" Grant looked at us, his expression grave. "We set a trap." The plan was simple. The next night, an unmarked police car would be stationed just out of view. Officers would monitor our security feed in real time. The moment the intruders showed up, they'd be caught before they had a chance to slip away. It should have given me some sense of relief. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Max's deep breaths beside me, I still felt that overwhelming sense of dread. They weren't done. They weren't afraid. And somehow, I knew they weren't going to wait much longer. The drive to the safe house felt like it stretched on forever, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Kara remained quiet in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, while Emily stared out the window in the back, her fingers gripping Rusty's fur like a lifeline. Townsend kept his eyes on the road behind us, scanning for any signs that we were being followed. The tension in the truck was suffocating. Every bump in the road, every flicker of headlights in the distance, felt like it could be the moment everything fell apart. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, focusing on the road ahead, trying to push down the sinking feeling in my gut. "How much farther?" Townsend asked, his voice low. Kara glanced at the map on her phone, the dim glow of the screen casting shadows on her face. 15 miles. We'll have to take a side road soon. The safe house isn't connected to any main highways. That's what makes it safe." Emily let out a slow breath. "And you're sure this place is still secure? That no one else knows about it?" Kara hesitated. I can't say that with complete certainty, but it's our best shot. Townsend scoffed. That's not exactly reassuring. It's the truth, Kara shot back. If I had anywhere better to take you, I would. But right now, this is all we've got. Rusty let out a soft whimper, shifting slightly in his seat. The dog had been on edge since we left the cabin, and I had a feeling he could sense our collective unease. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. We don't have a choice. We keep moving. The road turned rough as we veered off onto a narrow dirt path, the trees growing thicker around us. It felt like we were driving straight into the unknown, but there was no turning back now. A few miles in, Kara motioned for me to slow down. It's just up ahead, she said. Take that turn on the left. I followed her instructions, steering onto an even more secluded road that barely looked like it had been used in years. The truck jostled with every bump, and Emily held onto the side of her seat to steady herself. Then, through the trees, a small structure came into view. It wasn't much, just a single-story cabin with a tin roof surrounded by thick woods. It looked abandoned, but that was the point. I pulled up to the front, cutting the engine. For a moment, no one moved. We all sat there, listening to the silence, waiting for something to feel wrong. Stay here, Townsend said, reaching for his gun. I'll check it out first. I'm coming with you, I said, grabbing the shotgun from the back seat. Townsend didn't argue. He just nodded, and together we stepped out into the cold night air. The leaves crunched beneath our boots as we approached the cabin, our breaths visible in the chill. Townsend signaled for me to cover one side while he took the other. I moved cautiously, sweeping the shotgun across the front porch before testing the door handle. Locked! Townsend disappeared around the back, and I heard the sound of a window creaking open. A few seconds later, the door unlocked from the inside, and I pushed it open, stepping inside with my weapon raised. The cabin smelled of dust and old wood. It was sparsely furnished, just a few chairs, a table, and a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. But it was dry, sturdy, and most importantly, empty. Townsend gave me a nod. We're clear. I turned back toward the truck and signaled for the others to come inside. Kara led Emily and Rusty to the cabin, shutting the door behind them. Emily shivered. It's colder than I expected. Kara moved toward the fireplace. There's wood stacked outside. We can get a fire going. Townsend remained near the window, peering out into the woods. We should set up shifts. No one sleeps through the night. If Holloway or anyone else is tracking us, we need to be ready. I nodded. I'll take first watch. Emily sat down on the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. I just want to know when this will end. When I can stop running. Rusty curled up beside her, resting his head on her lap. Kara exhaled, leaning against the wall. We'll figure it out, but we need to survive the night first. I glanced at Townsend, who was still watching the trees. Yeah, I murmured. One step at a time. The fire crackled in the small cabin, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Emily sat on the couch, staring at the flames, lost in thought. Rusty was curled up at her feet, his ears twitching every so often as if he were still on high alert. Townsend sat near the door, his gun resting on the table beside him, eyes locked on the window. Kara stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching all of us. The silence stretched, heavy, and expectant. We all knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Townsend finally broke the quiet. We can't stay here forever. Emily let out a slow breath. Then what do we do? Keep running? Her voice was edged with exhaustion. I'm tired of running. Kara shifted. There might be another way. We all turned to her. She hesitated before speaking. If they're after your daughter because of something Landon was involved in, then we need to take away their reason for wanting her. Make it too dangerous for them to keep coming after you. Townsend scoffed. And how do we do that? Kara met his gaze. We expose them. Emily's face paled. You mean, go public? Exactly, Kara said. We take what we know and make sure the right people see it. We put enough light on them that they have no choice but to back off. I frowned. And how do we even know what we're dealing with? We barely understand what's going on. Kara exhaled, then reached into her jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. I do. I've been gathering information for months, watching, learning. I knew Landon was involved in something bigger, and I knew it wouldn't end with his death. This, she held up the drive, has everything. Names, transactions, locations, enough to burn them to the ground. Townsend leaned forward. And you're just now mentioning this? Kara's jaw tightened. Because I didn't know if I could trust you. Any of you. Until now. I exhaled sharply. So what's the plan? We take this to the media? The FBI? Both, Kara said. We release it to journalists and make sure law enforcement gets it too. They won't be able to silence everyone. Emily swallowed hard. But what if it backfires? What if it just makes them more desperate? Kara's expression darkened. Then we make sure they don't have the resources to do anything about it. Townsend stood. Let's do it. The sooner the better. I nodded, my grip tightening on the edge of the table. We end this tonight. Kara pulled out her phone, connecting the flash drive. I have a secure contact. We send it now. She tapped the screen, sending the files to multiple sources. The silence that followed felt heavier than any before it. Minutes passed. Then Kara's phone vibrated. It's done, she said. They have it. A breath of relief swept through the room. Emily let out a small, shaky laugh, covering her mouth. Rusty, sensing the shift in energy, wagged his tail slightly. Then Townsend's phone rang. He answered quickly. Yeah? His face darkened as he listened. Understood. He hung up and turned to us. They know. We need to leave. Now! Adrenaline shot through me. We scrambled to gather what little we had. Kara grabbed her bag, Emily held Rusty close, and we rushed for the door. As we stepped outside, the distant roar of engines cut through the night. Headlights appeared at the edge of the trees. Move! Townsend shouted. We ran. Into the woods. Into the darkness. The sound of pursuit closing in behind us. And for the first time, I felt hope. Because we weren't running to escape. We were running toward freedom. The forest swallowed us as we darted between the trees, the undergrowth thick and unyielding. The headlights bounced through the darkness, casting erratic shadows. My heart pounded as I tried to focus on the ground ahead, on keeping Emily close, on making sure Rusty stayed with us. Shots rang out behind us, shattering the silence of the night. Bark splintered from the trees as bullets missed their marks. Townsend shoved Emily forward. Go! Keep moving! The path curved downward, leading to a small ravine. Kara looked back once before turning to me. We need to lose them. If we can get down that ravine, we might be able to cut them off. I didn't hesitate. Go! We slid down the muddy incline, branches scraping against our arms. Rusty yelped as he lost his footing but managed to right himself before reaching the bottom. I turned to help Emily just as she slipped, catching her before she fell. Townsend and Kara reached the bottom next, both panting. The sounds of pursuit were still behind us, but more distant. We need to split up, Kara said, glancing at Townsend. They're tracking our movements together. If we separate, at least one of us will make it out. Emily shook her head. No, we stay together. Townsend exhaled. She's right. We've come this far as a group. We don't split up now. The ground trembled as another set of headlights approached from a different direction. We had been flanked. Damn it, I muttered. Kara looked up at the trees. There's a way out. If we climb, we can get to the ridgeline before they do. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. With renewed determination, we scrambled up, every muscle burning as we pulled ourselves higher. Rusty was the first to reach the top, barking wildly to urge us forward. We emerged at the top, the valley sprawling below us. The sight of it took my breath away, because at the end of the ridge, flashing blue and red lights waited for us. Townsend grinned. Kara's contact came through. A final gunshot rang out behind us, but it was too late. We had made it. Emily collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Rusty pressed against her, licking her face. The nightmare was over. For the first time in what felt like forever, we were safe.